In April 2025, a Colorado courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Guilty. First-degree murder. Stalking. Criminal impersonation. Daniel Krug, 44 years old, was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. This was not a typical murder case. It was a story of calculated deception that unfolded over months. A husband who terrorized his own wife while pretending to protect her. A man who invented a phantom stalker, manipulated fear inside his own home, and when his carefully constructed lie began to collapse, killed the woman he claimed to love. Months later, Kristil Krug's family would say that if communication companies had responded more quickly to search warrants, Kristil might still be alive. What follows is the complete story of how a marriage became a murder plot, and how digital evidence ultimately exposed the truth. Kristil Grimsrud met Daniel Krug in the early 2000s. She was intelligent, ambitious, and driven, working toward a career as a biochemical engineer. Daniel appeared stable and dependable. They married in 2007 and built what looked like a normal, successful life in Broomfield, Colorado. They had 3 children, careers, and a quiet suburban routine. But behind closed doors, the marriage was deteriorating. By 2023, Kristil and Daniel were sleeping in separate bedrooms. Kristil had confided in family members that she wanted out of the marriage. Friends noticed changes in her demeanor. She seemed anxious, withdrawn, and under constant stress. Daniel knew she was unhappy, and he knew he was losing control. What Daniel could not accept was being left. During the trial, a former girlfriend of Daniel's testified about a disturbing pattern. Years earlier, after their breakup, she said Daniel had stalked her using fake online identities and multiple personas. He was never charged in that case, but the behavior established a chilling precedent. And soon, Kristil would experience something eerily similar. In October 2023, Kristil received a message that immediately unsettled her. It came from someone claiming to be Jack Anthony Holland, a boy she had briefly dated as a teenager more than 20 years earlier. The message suggested meeting up. Kristil ignored it, but the messages continued. Texts turned into emails from an address called ahollandkicks@gmail.com. The tone shifted from casual to obsessive, then to threatening. Some messages were poorly written, rambling, and disturbing. Explicit sexual images followed. Then came comments that made Kristil feel watched. The sender referenced her expired license plate registration. Another message mentioned seeing her at the dentist. Details she had never shared publicly. Then photos of Daniel appeared, sent from the stalker's account. "This your husband?" one message asked. The implication was terrifying. Whoever this was seemed to be watching both of them. The messages escalated into threats. "I'll get rid of him, and then we can be together." So easy. Kristil was terrified. She began carrying a concealed weapon, took firearm safety classes, and installed security cameras around the house. She created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every message, every contact, every moment she felt watched. She called the stalker Kickman, after the email address, and she went to the police. When Kristil met with Broomfield police, body camera footage captured her exhaustion and fear. She told officers the stalking had made her paranoid everywhere she went. She showed them her detailed log. Police took the case seriously and began monitoring the situation. Daniel appeared to be just as frightened as Kristil. He spoke openly with detectives about Kickman. He played the role of the concerned husband perfectly. He talked about protecting his family. He supported Kristil's precautions. He even helped install more security cameras around their home just days before her death. But investigators began noticing something strange. Some of the threatening messages appeared to be originating from IP addresses associated with Daniel's workplace, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, where he worked as an environmental scientist. The investigation was closing in. On the morning of December 14, 2023, 11 days before Christmas, Kristil followed her normal routine. She got the children ready for school. Daniel helped. Nothing appeared unusual. Daniel drove one of their daughters to the bus stop that morning, but he left the house later than usual. His vehicle's dash camera, which was normally active, had been disabled. At 8:22 a.m., Kristil's phone stopped being used. Later that morning, pre-scheduled messages were sent from Kristil's phone to Daniel and to a police detective. The messages falsely suggested Kristil had been unfaithful, an apparent attempt to create confusion and redirect suspicion. Daniel arrived at work shortly afterward. Around midday, Daniel sent several unanswered texts and calls to Kristil. Then he contacted police, saying it felt strange that his wife wasn't responding. He requested a welfare check. When officers arrived at the home, they found the garage door open. Inside, Kristil Krug was lying on the concrete floor. She had been struck multiple times in the head and stabbed fatally in the heart. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Daniel was brought back to the house. Body camera footage captured him appearing devastated. A victim advocate comforted him as he sobbed in the police vehicle. He focused repeatedly on his children, insisting he be the one to tell them what had happened. To anyone watching, Daniel Krug looked like a grieving husband who had failed to save his wife from a stalker. But detectives moved quickly. They located Jack Anthony Holland in Utah, more than 8 hours away. He had a solid alibi, confirmed by witnesses and records. There was no evidence he had traveled to Colorado. He was cleared completely, which meant the stalker never existed. Digital forensic analysis exposed everything. The fake email accounts had been created on a secure network at Daniel's workplace. Burner phones used to send the messages were purchased with a Visa gift card linked to Daniel. Cell tower data showed those phones moving alongside Daniel's personal phone. Investigators found his Google searches from the day before the murder. How long does it take to lose consciousness from head trauma? They discovered Daniel had taken photos of himself and sent them to Kristil from the stalker's accounts to make it appear someone else was watching him. Security cameras were disabled. A doorbell camera was covered with tape. The home security system was accessed using Kristil's phone after she was already dead. Every path led back to one person. Daniel Krug had created the stalker. He terrorized his own wife for months. When Kristil began to pull away and the investigation threatened to expose him, he killed her. The trial began in April 2025. Prosecutors argued that Daniel created the stalker to frighten Kristil into staying with him, hoping to position himself as her protector. When the plan failed and criminal exposure became inevitable, he chose murder. The defense claimed there was no physical evidence tying Daniel to the killing, but the digital evidence was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus additional years for stalking and impersonation. Kristil's father described Daniel's actions as selfish evil that robbed 3 children of both parents. Even after conviction, Daniel maintained his innocence, telling family members that the real killer was still out there. Today, Kristil's children are being raised by her family, surrounded by people determined to honor her memory. Her relatives continue to push for reforms requiring faster responses to digital evidence requests in stalking cases, because Kristil did everything right. She documented the harassment. She went to the police. She took precautions. And she was still killed by the man who promised to protect her. The puppet master pulled the strings until there were none left. And now, behind bars, he has finally lost control.